Welcome to the second Housing First Umpqua People's Town Hall or virtual town hall about homelessness. This session, we're going to kind of talk about the Housing First Umpqua recommendations that we're going to make about local kind of policy issues for the city of Roseburg. Currently, the city is involved in a process of having various people come and talk to them and make recommendations, and we're going to see whether the city of Roseburg is actually going to do something. I believe there's a session this coming Monday, the 31st. And I think that's where there'll be some staff presentations as well as some ideas from the City Council about what they want to do. And so part of this is to talk about the things that if people are interested to have them promote these kinds of things with the City Council. And so we provided made up some slides for tonight's presentation just to kind of outline what Housing First is really looking at promoting at this local level, and not necessarily what we're doing for all areas of housing. So local solutions, and we're going to say this over and over again because we're talking about homelessness. We need to stay focused on housing. So the number one thing that we are going to promote is what the city can do to promote the increasing the stock of income-based affordable housing for people. And Housing First Umpqua has looked a lot at primarily chronic street level homeless over the last year and a half that we have been around. But our recommendations on public policy have to do with, we look at family homelessness as equally as important, and housing children probably more important than housing anyone else. So we don't want to say it's an us or them kind of situation, house homeless, chronic homeless, and not house other. But one of the reality is we are having this discussion because the people, the members of the community are really kind of tired of seeing, the chronically homeless that they see daily on the street. So housing, and we're going to talk a little bit about the two proposals that Housing First Umpqua is going to be out there promoting more in the near future, and that is about for folks who are chronically homeless living on the street. And we think there's two issues. One is a structure and what kind of structure is someone going to be asked to live in. And the other thing is where are these things going to be located. So we believe that there is some really good solutions out there. One is the block project, which is the house you see there. It's actually probably about the same size as the tiny house on the right. But the block project came out of Seattle. Two architects developed this particular structure, and the project idea, which is not just the housing, which is fully self-contained, it also can be off-grid. So that house you're looking at has a compostable toilet, it has solar power, it has a water catchment system. And I can't remember what the heat system is. So that does not have to even be put into the infrastructure in order to be put in someone's backyard, although it can be set up to do so. So that is a structure that we think is looking at. It is a sustainable model that we can have in the community. And it can be done low cost, particularly if a public agency or a nonprofit like Housing First Umpqua is the one actually building the project because they have access to volunteer labor and donations of goods and services that a for-profit private developer would not have. And the other thing, so those houses at the block project are on a metal beam foundation. They're put directly on the ground. They're not mobile. They don't have wheels. But the tiny house village, and that's what I've looked at for years as a solution to this particular population that really is doable. My husband and I lived in an RV that was kind of adapted more to actually full-time living, and we did that for quite a long time. And so it is a doable way for people to survive. And actually exist. We actually liked, what we did. So, and tiny houses, this one allows a mobility, but it can be in a village. But also, if we change some policies at the local level, it could actually probably be put in someone's backyard as well. And and we and Molly has a tiny home, and can tell you the virtues of that stuff, I'm sure. But so these are the two things that we're looking at. We want so housing is the only thing that really solves homelessness, is housing, just bottom line. You can fool yourself that if you solve someone's addiction or you address their mental health issue, you're going to house them. But if anything, the last year and a half has taught us that is a fallacy. It's a thing that we have to get over, because you can fix as many people as you want, but we just don't literally have the housing stock for people, particularly people who make less than $2,000 a month, can afford in Douglas County. Right now, HUD's fair market rent, which is not market rent, it's what HUD will pay, is $815 for a one-bedroom in Douglas County right now. So, going to emphasize SSI, supplemental security income for elderly and disabled, the income is $783. So right now, people on SSI can't even afford what HUD says is a fair market rent for Douglas County for a one-bedroom. So the things that the city can do is help put these things in the city, either in people's backyards, which is what the block project is about, or put them in some kind of village, RV park, tiny village, that kind of thing, and they can help facilitate that. The other thing that they can do is they can actually follow the recommendation of the study that our citizens paid for. And so last year in 2019, the city had a study done, and it was called the Homeless Population Study. And the recommendations that it made regarding affordable housing was the things that the city can actually do. And these are, here's the list of them. This is taken directly out of the study, and there's a link on this slide that goes there, but you can go to the city's website and find the entire study. It's very good. It was very well done. So the regulatory tools, financial tools, development tools, planning tools, and dedicated revenue sources. So these are all things that the city should be looking at as ways the city can help facilitate affordable housing. You see things like using abandoned property, the property, public lands. And so all of these things have been studied for decades. So these are not, we're not, as they say, reinventing the wheel, but we would really think that if you're going to ask an expert an opinion, that you have to have a really darn good reason not to be following that expert's opinion. And so, that expert study, the things the city can do, and we just want them to look at these recommendations and start earnestly looking at the way the city can play a role in increasing affordable housing. And when we talk about affordable housing, it's affordable housing that is based upon household income, 30% of household income, not some other definition of affordable housing. So the other things that people always talk about, there's a myriad of other things, and we're not going to go into talking about mental health services or addiction services tonight, because there are entities that taxpayers already pay for to provide services for most people that we encounter who are homeless. It's on the Oregon Health Plan, for example. So I think that that's another discussion about how those services are coordinated, but that's not really the role of the city itself. And so keep in mind, we are looking at what we believe the city of Roseburg has the power to do. So I don't know that, in trying to analyze what we would talk about, we believe that those things need to be addressed. We just don't believe that the city of Roseburg would play or can play much of a role in having that happen. But the other things that we think they can do is address some of the problems that people complain about, is providing what we're going to call safe ground, decriminalize homelessness, address public health, safety, sanitation, and safety issues, and a homeless and housing commission or committee. And so those are the other things that, at this point that we see our recommendations to the city of Roseburg and what they can do about it. And I just want to say, if anybody has any questions or comments, you can interject at any time that you want. I
I
don't
have
know
one
the,
question.
yeah.
So sometimes I've heard things said like, um, uh, churches aren't allowed to have people stay, long term or overnight, or, if they're not equipped with the proper facilities, then they can't stay. And so part of what you're talking about is changing like city code. But what other barriers do you see that is preventing the city right now from using unused properties, leveraging property management and builders and things to be able to actually build income-based affordable housing, or just make some available, because it sounds like you guys have a stock of property, they're just not affordable. So what other barriers are there?
Well, I think it's, and other people can chime in, I think that one of the issues is certainly that will. They don't have the will. We have people in the city council that have been there for decades, some of whom were there when they had, passed the prohibited camping law, for example. So that's what they saw as a way to deal with homelessness that started happening in bigger numbers in the 1990s, okay? So, they've never put a dime into actually affordable housing that I'm aware of. And in my recollection, the only thing the city of Roseburg has ever done to address homelessness is the $25,000 they gave to Casa de Belén to try to save it, and it now closed for the second or third time in its history. But and that was a youth shelter. It was family and youth shelter. I think at the time they gave them the $25,000. And the other thing that they might say they did for homelessness is a sobering center, but I would take exception to that. So I think it's not a policy now. I think they have a right, churches have a right to have some kind of overnight camping for people under Oregon law currently. So I don't know, it used to be the city was stopping churches from doing that. State legislature kind of, made it more clear what the cities could and could not do about that. And so I just think it's a matter of I don't know that we found any churches to do that. And I don't want to put you on the spot, Wayne, but, do you have any input about that kind of thing?
I don't believe that there's any laws that prohibit or ordinances that prohibit people from camping on church properties. I think a couple of them have been talked to when it comes to the HTAG group, reaching out to a couple churches. I just don't think there was any acceptance of it when it was talked about heavily. As of right now, it hasn't been talked about for a while. So that's all I have on that.
So money, I've heard also people talking about liability and things like that. Um, what what other takes are there here in this whole situation? Because I feel like it's complex. There are a lot of people involved, and when city council talks about stakeholders, we may not necessarily know who exactly they're talking about.
Well, I think there's a lot of public pressure. The last city council meeting, there were letters read um, in part of this whole process of input from the citizens. Most of the letters, if I remember, that were read, they weren't even people who live in the city, and they were objecting to us helping the homeless in the city. So it is just this philosophical, I think, difference. it's, I think some of it really does boil down to it. Some of it is, I think people perceive they know what works when they don't really know. And there's a group of them that once they get information, you can change their mind. There's a group of them you can't. And probably right now, the most vocal pressure point on the city are the people who are objecting to the things that actually do work and have worked in other cities. So one of the things I think we'd like to, again, encourage people is to connect with the city council, start doing the kind of things that citizens do to get their public officials, to do the right thing. So, I don't know if anybody else who, wants to make comment about, that perception. But
Yeah, I did hear there was some sort of clouding of the criminal element mixed with the homeless element. And in the work sessions that the city council had recorded, they were talking a little bit about how, just what you're talking about here, where like there's this idea that they shouldn't be helped, or they don't want to be helped, and they don't want to be housed.
I think
Wayne, did you have your hand up? Wait, I don't know. Wayne, did you have a hand up, or were you just?
Yeah, I mean, I'll let you guys finish your thought, but I do have one of the churches and one of the local organizations has taken a couple steps to change how they've been addressing homelessness a little bit, and that would be St. Vincent de Paul. They actually just got their shower trailer delivered last week, and they're going to be rolling it out with the meals that they provide Mondays and Wednesdays in Sutherland and Tuesdays and Thursdays in Roseburg. So
Cool.
I've had a meeting with them, and they expressed a pretty good desire to help in different ways, and they were really like asking great questions on how they can be helpful. So that is something.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, wow, thanks for sharing. What days were that? That was Mondays and Wednesdays in Sutherland and Tuesdays and Thursdays?
Correct. I don't have times yet, but I can
Roseburg.
definitely get them to Housing First Umpqua when I get times.
Thanks.
well, I watched the work sessions from the city council, and it's very interesting that after many years of Betsy and I working with the city council and telling them about our research on what works in other places, what is working in other places, I find it interesting that they now say, does HFU recommend? They want to know what our types of solutions are, and all the research that we've done. If I hear one more time that we don't have a homeless problem, they don't want help, they can go to the mission. It's an act of will that's so pervasive. It's sort of like they're really good at criminalizing homelessness, but it's more or less, they always function from an us and them. And Betsy, you were telling me that there were two people. Who are those two people that were asking you to come forward with Housing First recommendations? There's two people on the city council that are very sincere in not keeping with the status quo of doing nothing. Who are those two
Well,
people?
I've had conversations with Andrea Zielinski and Brian Prowitz about things that can actually be done. And one of the recommendations that we're presenting tonight is something that that Brian brought up that hopefully is something that the city council as a whole recommends to understands is probably something that needs to be happening. Um, the biggest stumbling block, I mean, and I think that over the years of the discussions about homelessness, I think there has been an evolution in both of those city councilors. You know, I think that they were very much kind of like what the citizens are, you know, why do we need to do this? It kind of enabling, but there has been that ability for them, you know, so it gives some hope that that will happen. But I'm gonna, unless somebody has any other comment, I'm gonna go back to this safe ground or safe spot communities. So one of the things, the Safe Spot Communities is a name based upon a project in Walla Walla that Brian brought up. And it's really very much like these villages that you see. They have the Conestoga huts. And I'm going to say, for a variety of reasons, if you don't know it now, Housing First Umpqua does not support Conestoga huts, particularly those buildings. But there's another reason to look at it. Safe ground, from our perspective, is a place for people to sleep, rest, and just be. And I'm going to emphasize the just be, because one of the things like the Walla Walla Project and other ones is they, you know, put restrictions on when the person can be at their, you know, Conestoga hut, you know, their shelter, even though it's designated for them and their belongings are in it. Many times they'll make the people leave during the day. And it's fine if people have things to do, but just to move them out to hang out on the street because for some reason you have some false sense that they need to be doing something, I think is very counterproductive. So I think that people, you know, certainly can be encouraged and helped to get what they need to this to be a temporary thing. But just to say go out and go away just because that makes us think you're doing something that we think you should be doing is really kind of counterproductive to even to the philosophy of housing first. So you can either leave, so from our perspective, you can either leave people where they are. You know, this is something we've advocated for. Actually, the CDC, based in this pandemic, you know, recommends this, that you leave people where they are, and then you provide basic sanitation like toilets, trash cans, you know, and to us, that's a minimum, but I think the CDC recommendation is also hand washing capabilities. So the other option is you create safe spots in the safe spot communities. And that is organized, you know, what people call encampments, but just organized spots instead of everyone being along the river, which is what the citizenry seems to like the least. And I can't say that I blame them, but you did have to have an alternative. And I'm going to emphasize, as I have with City Council, that the Boise decision is going to probably continue to impact this particular issue. And because currently, based upon that, there was a decision in Grants Pass that said not only is it criminalized, and this was a federal court case that was brought against the city of Grants Pass that had a similar tactic to avoid violating the Boise decision because they didn't criminalize, i.e. make it a crime to be camping. They made it a ticket or violation instead. Well, the district court in Medford indicated that you can't do that either, and that they believe the Boise decision, although it didn't address that specifically, actually meant you can't do things that continue to punish people and put barriers in their lives if you're not going to provide them a place to be, or if the community doesn't provide them a place to be. Both the idea of this safe spot community would, in fact, for the, you know, people that it serves, actually help alleviate that problem. For the city, you know, and it actually help with shelter. What that shelter would be, and if this were a test case to evaluate, and with the anticipation that it would be broadened, not just do a feel good, we're going to fix 10 people at a time, but actually, if you want to shelter them, and the idea was we will continue to shelter them, there'll be more safe spaces, we'll accommodate it. The one in Walla Walla not only uses Conestoga huts, it uses elevated tents. There are various options. One of the things I realized I didn't like about the Conestoga huts has to do with the space it affords. There are other designs, but that's a different subject. So you provide basic sanitation, and the safe spot communities, if the city were to do that, would create the ability for people to better access services or have services come to them instead of people being along the river. A lot of outreach workers, well, we don't have a lot of outreach workers, but it might make it easier for us to have outreach workers. Yeah, Wayne, you want to unmute yourself?
I'm one of those outreach workers that
Yeah,
actually
you're
goes out.
you're the only one, right? You,
I don't know about that, but I'm one of them.
well, you and Dane with HIV Alliance, I think there are two. There are two of them. So, and this has nothing to do with COVID, okay? Um, so you reduce the cost of law enforcement and other city services. So the real payback, I believe, for the city is I think you would dramatically see a reduction in law enforcement cost by doing even this simple kind of thing as having organized camps, provide trash cans, toilets, hand washing station, and actually even showers. That would be more ideal. And with the idea that it's always temporary, always the objective is you do not have to have a lifetime supply of these things for people because you're working on the affordable housing side as well. And so they reduce costs for law enforcement. I think that I hope the city council pays particularly attention to what both their city prosecutor said and the municipal judge said about the numbers of people that are homeless that are in those court or is in the municipal court. You know, that is, you know, they estimated 85. I've heard a circuit court judge estimate 90%, but that is a huge chunk of our law enforcement dollars going into addressing folks who are homeless. And sometimes you do see that it may be drinking in public, but hey, those people probably wouldn't have been drinking in public if they had a home. They'd be drinking at their home. You know, there's no reason to be sitting on the curb in downtown Roseburg to have that beer. Okay. You'd rather have it at home. So it would also then create stability for homeless to access help. And that is the one thing that people, you know, they get awakened at night. Numerous reports, you lose track of how many people are awakened. They're roused in the middle of the night for police for seemingly unknown reasons. You know, somebody's asleep at 2 o'clock in the morning, you know, why the police are waking them up, you know, that becomes a question. But that also interferes with that person's ability to think and function. Also, they're victims of crime. So if you had a safe spot community where their stuff was at least safer, you would alleviate some of those things that probably have a psychological impact on people who are homeless and helps create that stability. So, you know, we are a proponent of leaving people alone and providing them a safe place to be. And we also believe that addresses many of the concerns that the neighbors have about trash, about poop in the river and on the riverbanks. These things are still going on, but you know, if you actually prevented them from happening, such as not preventing people from pooping, because you can't do that. I'm sure the city would like to, but you can't. So at least you could prevent it from going onto the ground or in the river. So one of the other, were you going to say something, Martha, about this?
Yeah,
You've got 30 minutes, you guys.
It's like five years ago we did the poop brochure and they just ignored it. I think it took many more citizens to complain about people shitting on the riverbank for at least, for them to even understand the public health risk. And it's a huge public health risk.
So yes, and we still have copies of that poop brochure if you want to see them. So decriminalizing homelessness, eliminate acts of living laws such as prohibited camping. And there are other things they consider, you know, resting. We don't have loitering laws in the state of Oregon. You cannot do that. Panhandling is not against the law in the state of Oregon. So those laws are already, they can't happen.
But they are making city ordinances against them.
Yeah, but they're a violation. They'll be overturned. You know, you just have one lawyer hit them. They can't do that. I mean, they're when they're tested, they're overturned by
But they
the
are,
Oregon
which I think
courts.
is a big problem. Like they are making them, and they are ticketing people and harassing people based off these city ordinances, which I think is wrong.
I don't see that in Roseburg, yeah, on those particular things that I mentioned that are clearly a violation of state law. But
They've
it could be
tried
in.
though. They haven't passed one there. They've passed one in Lane County, in
Yes, yes.
Eugene.
No, I did. I think Springfield, I think I saw that, had done that. But, you know, and unfortunately, let's be honest, if the people that you're ticketing are homeless and poor and disenfranchised from the system, you know, God forbid you have mental illness, are you really going to find the resources to challenge that ticket? So, you know, there's an old dictum that your rights are only as good as your ability to enforce them. So, you know, and so that's where I think even the city of Roseburg has gotten away with this criminalizing ticketing, you know, thing, is because they really haven't had enough legal challenge to their particular behavior. I think they're in exactly the same position as Grants Pass. And it's actually what I told a couple of city councilors that I spoke with, that I believe that they're in the same position. And, you know, we have lawyers at this point that will do that. If there's a homeless person that wants to exercise their rights, you know, we could see the city of Roseburg being exactly in the same position. And I got to tell you, it's the same thing. Up until a year and a half ago, they were constantly taking people's stuff and throwing it away. We used to tell people, there's a Levan case out of the federal circuit, Ninth Circuit Court again, that says they can't do that. We have an Oregon revised statute that says they can't do that. They continue to do it. It wasn't until somebody that we encouraged, who finally did what we suggested, went to legal aid, got a lawsuit threatened against the city. The city had to pay them some money. And now there's this, you know, agreement of what they're going to do with their belongings. And now the city is saying, oh, poor us. We violated, you know, look what this poor homeless person did to us because we're trying to pick up the trash. So anyhow, so, you know, it takes just one, you know, maybe two kind of lawsuits to, you know, encourage people to not be silly. The problem is you have city council members who want to pander to the people that are complaining, and they want to do that more so than say, no, we can't do that because we might get sued. They don't want to look at it that way. You know, they don't have that kind of leadership within our city council at this point. You know, certainly not a majority of them. So besides that is eliminate the exclusion zone for acts of living. So I'm not sure that people are aware, but in the downtown core of Roseburg, and I circle that because I live down here and I'm at home. It is, if you have 3 strikes, you can be kicked out of the downtown business, basically, area. And some of those things, those strikes, include a prohibited camping ticket. So there are more serious things that are actually violent, that are actually crimes and should be crimes. But the exclusion zone was really an attempt to displace homeless people, not to stop crime. And they'll say otherwise, but you know, it's really kind of like other jurisdictions. You know, the business people, again, the squeaky wheel, the business people downtown are looking, the homeless are running out. You know, our business would be thriving if it weren't for the homeless. You know, so the city then panders to that, and that we have an exclusion zone. Actually, at the time, and this is the problem with our city council, at the time this exclusion zone was proposed and passed, other jurisdictions in Oregon and elsewhere quit using them because they weren't working. So, and they knew that, and they were given that information, yet decided they wanted to do what they wanted to do because they know what works, even though it's never shown to work. And I'm not sure the exclusion zone, if we did an audit of that, would show that either. The other is to, and then we talked about it, provide the safe space. So that would then help with the decriminalization, you know, because they would now have a safe space to be. You wouldn't need to worry about ticketing them. So the quote that I can't even see because my little screen is over here, I'm gonna have to move this, that I put up here is actually from HUD's website.
We have a question when you have a pause.
Yeah. just basically that there's ample evidence that alternatives to criminalization policies can adequately balance the needs of all parties. And that means neighbors, homeowners, business people, city, etc. This is from HUD, U.S. Housing and Urban Development. So yeah, question.
Yeah, it's from Ashley. Ashley Hicks. Do you support a low barrier shelter, and why do you believe it'll work? What do you believe will be the largest hurdles to overcome?
I believe if we're going to provide emergency shelter of any type and you want to address the people that are living on the streets that you can't get into, things like the rescue mission for whatever reason, it has to be low barrier shelter. I am not in favor of shelters, congregate shelters, okay? I don't think that Housing First, Umpqua, I don't think as a policy we support congregate shelters. And that means, you know, all bunked together. What we do support is shelter, individual shelter. We believe that the most resources should be going to put people in those block homes or tiny homes and getting them the support services connected to them, which is what the Housing First model is. Housing First is not about temporary or transitional housing. It is about permanent housing and services that people need being brought to them, or they engage with them, whatever works for the person, not for the entity. And what was the other part of her question? I'm sorry. Or did I answer it?
What do you believe will be the largest hurdles to overcome?
For the individual or for the community?
I don't know. Do you want to
Well,
expand on that?
I
when
think
we're
it's more
talking
so
about,
of a shelter.
yeah, when we're talking about shelters, we are trying to focus on permanent housing solutions. And that's what we want to force our emphasis on, not temporary shelters, low barrier shelters where you time out, then you're back on the street. We need permanent solutions. And so many of our homeless in Roseburg cannot stay housed. We've housed several people over the years. And if they don't have the support services that come to them, they end up back on the street. Am I right, Betsy? Or dead in the river.
Yeah. Yeah,
10
I mean,
people.
some people, you know, stay housed, but when you come from long-term chronic homelessness and have other issues, yeah, if you don't have those support service, we don't have
Yeah.
a way to reintegrate folks into society. I think
No.
it'll be a never-ending problem, even getting them to access services. And I think that the biggest barrier here to do what is right, if that's what Ashley is, it's really the public's attitude. I think right now they are one of the public, you know, wants it to just go away. And they see, you know, we've been led to believe, you know, law enforcement people want to follow the law, they'll do the right thing, so therefore it's over, you know. So therefore, that's said and done. You go law enforce the law, and then we'll do that. But we know how much it costs to jail somebody. It's $80 some a day.
I think it also may have to do with the fact that we're not distinguishing between the unhoused and the real criminal element downtown and around the river, and you know, all those places that unhoused people hang out because they're preyed upon and they're vulnerable. And so if we don't, I mean, that's a big barrier. If we're looking at like changing people's mindset and making them stop thinking that it's a willpower issue or that it's a moral issue, and more so that it's a systemic and social issue, then we need to start looking at the real people that are perpetrating the crimes and stop victimizing homeless people even more. Aside from just having property owners and property managers be able to like have some sort of incentive to get people in their housing so that they in an affordable way, not in a fair market rent way, which is ridiculously expensive right now.
Can you talk about the health and sanitation and safety issues that we want to recommend to the city? that they
Yeah.
take a look at seriously?
Well, this is provide the toilets and trash cans where people are. We're going to go back to what we asked them to do in 2015, 16, when we weren't housing for Umpqua, and what housing for Umpqua and H-Tag and the public health official and Service, the local neighborhood association downtown, and their neighborhood watch all asked the city to put toilets and trash cans where people are now. And we don't have toilets and trash cans where people are now. So that is going back to that issue. If you're going to do nothing else, that addresses one of those trash. I heard from the last city council thing for home, the people talking, the public comments about homeless. One of the big thing was a person, I think they live over in Laurelwood, which is a nice area on the river. And their biggest complaint is all the trash they have to pick up, and they were even suggesting the city help them pay for the trash that they're now paying to dispose of. Well, I think that those citizens might just be fine with, making sure they don't have trash in their backyard, which is along the river. And the woman did recommend somewhere outside, her neighborhood, a place for people to camp, right? So, and that's all well and good, but the farther you get away when you're talking about people with no transportation, having difficult challenges of getting things anyway, the farther out of the city you go, the more problematic it becomes to even serve them. Then how are you going to deal with that, the service aspect of it? So the other thing is provide safe ground. We're going to go back to that. We believe if you provide a place for camp, you can help manage, the toilet and trash can. And then the other thing is I cannot fathom how any public official would not want to follow the CDC guidelines, particularly when it comes to providing, oh yeah, I do, toilets and trash cans. So the toilets and trash cans and leaving people camp where they are has been the recommendation from the CDC almost from the very beginning of COVID. So, and we're not talking about, whether you believe COVID or not, the reality is people living the way they do on the river, being moved along is a recipe for a public health crisis. It is why the public health official, particularly the toilet issue, was part of, support of us trying to get trash cans and toilets, where people are. So that is a public health issue. It's not just an inconvenience. So, this is the most ludicrous, really, public policy issue that I can think of off the top of my head.
Wayne is making a really good point here in the chat that apparently there was a $25,000 study commission that said that we have a lack of coordination. And weren't you guys going to talk more about a city-run commission? I want to hear more about that.
Yeah, that's the under the recommendation, but you're absolutely right, Wayne. I think that everybody who thinks they know what homelessness is needs to read that study. We did not write it, so it's not our bias. So they didn't commission us to do it. They had people from outside that get paid to do this stuff. But you're excellent point, Wayne.
We
right.
had some input on it though, I'm pretty sure. I know that I was called and I'm pretty sure you were called too.
Well, they asked some people's, input about it, but what it wasn't, it came up being the kind of recommendation that we would say, but not just because of that input, right? Not just because of advocates or people that just work with the homeless. It was analyzing the whole thing, right? So yeah.
But it's everything we've been saying for free.
Well, but it's everything we've been saying. It's everything that the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness have been saying for well over a decade now. I come across, periodically an email I sent to the City Council in 2012 from their recommendations that are exactly the same thing. This report in 2019 is saying that they paid to hear when they could have just read the U.S. Interagency Council recommendations, which have been around forever and are made up of 19 federal agencies from the U.S. Department of Justice to HUD. You know, it's really a huge that. So if you're gonna believe things, you might believe those things, not things that people tell you on memes, not, you know, Seattle is falling apart. You know, I can't remember the name of that video they had on a while ago. So about Seattle is dying. Yes, yes. Oh my gosh. So Homeless and Housing Commission, here you go. So one of the recommendations that came about through HTAG was to have some kind of homeless commission or a commission. I think that we originally, you know, sent something to the city council when they started this process about our individual services and housing for Umpqua does, but we also made it, you know, that we agreed with that recommendation. So this is what we thought up: establish a city homeless and housing commission to provide advice to the city council and mayor, the goal to reduce and prevent homelessness and reduce the impact of homelessness on the community. For me, the other part of it is if that commission is staffed with the people who know the information that needs to be known, it won't get bogged down in analysis paralysis, okay? And that is a concern always when anybody says the word, let's form a committee to me. Okay, I don't care if it's a city, I don't care if it's a political organization I belong to, you know, those are almost like a red flag. What are we gonna do? Nothing? Is that, you know, is this tabling this thing forever because we're gonna give it to this commission? So I think that if there was a commission, it had the right folks on it. And I think that just general members of the public needs to be represented. I think someone who is homeless needs to be represented in such a place, because you need to make decisions based upon what people who actually experience homelessness, you know, provide as information. They can't be ignored. You can't train them to do things that they don't, you know, even need. I used to do literacy, adult literacy stuff for, it was one of my professions. And there's a great saying in that is that, you know, adults don't want answers for things they don't have questions about. Okay, adults don't want you telling them what to do when they don't think it's a problem to them. I think you have to, you know, respect that out of somebody, you know. So the goal, you know, and this can be an oversight body. If it goes back to my basic belief, all of these things that are housing, homeless services need to be put back in the public sphere. And so I am a big fan of all of our housing that we make with public tax dollars now be done by our local housing authorities. No more, because there's public meetings, public minutes. We can go look at their books, every dollar that they spend under Oregon's public records law. This commission would fall under the Oregon public records law. So if they're not doing their job, if they're just meeting for lunch, you know, we can say, hey, wait a second, we can be there. We can watch what's happening. We can listen to reports. So I think that is something that can be productive if handled right. And I will say, in watching, you know, what happened in Lane County, you know, you have the Housing and Poverty Board, right? It's a Homeless and Poverty Board, right? And for Lane County. And they immediately addressed the COVID issue with putting out hand sanitizer, you know, washing stations and trash cans and toilets where homeless people were.
Yep.
I mean, not just to where the park goers are.
Yeah.
Right.
You know,
I'd like to say that it's really important that they not look at a homeless and housing commission as a do nothing. It has to be action oriented. And when I was listening to NPR's Morning Edition, they said this woman's name, Maria Wilson or whatever, and they said she's been really, really helpful in helping homeless people, because she asked the homeless people what they needed and then helped them get them. And she's very, very successful. And I really think that the city council needs to understand that they have to have homeless people at the table.
nothing about us without us.
That's
There
That's
right.
you go.
a phrase that a lot of people are using, that have not been included and brought to the table for a long time in a lot of different arenas.
Well, they say if you don't have a seat at the table, you're probably lunch.
So that actually, this leads us into a good question that probably a council such as you guys, or a commission such as you guys are talking about, would probably tackle or take on. Ashley Hicks is asking, do you believe that the 5-acre lot owned by the city on General Ave would be adequate for tiny homes, permanent housing, maybe block housing? That's just my input. Currently, that property is set aside for a park. Maybe that parcel could be better used for housing.
Is that the one by the airport? Is she, yeah, Ashley, is that the one by the airport you're talking about? Is that general?
Yes.
Um, yes. Notwithstanding the Shadow Ranch people who don't even live in the city, not wanting it there. And if Martha, if you want a better perspective, it's, where that big lot where the airport is, right across from Lowe's, that's owned by the city. And so Ashley got some pushback by suggesting that as a place for people to go. But I think that we have to be objective in looking at anything. And any property that the city owns, I think, does have to be considered, and any place that people are going to be, there's going to have to be an ability to mitigate problems caused by people who are there. And that's just going to happen. I don't care where it is. I think that would be logistically, it's got enough space. I mean, there's space there. And a permanent RV park type of permanent housing project, if that would be allowed there. And I think that somebody at a city council, I think that I watched raise the FAA may not allow that, but I think that would be maybe a better solution would be something like a tiny house project there, as opposed to an encampment, because that would actually fit more in with that neighborhood, because there are residents there,
Yeah.
so maybe.
Yeah. Wayne is saying there might not be pushback depending on what you build, but also maybe also the people you house, like seniors with disabilities, um, things
Right.
like that.
Yeah, I agree. And I agree. And there's definitely enough housing. I know in talking to folks at the senior center where our office is, talking to me about the fact that they're seeing more and more seniors who are being displaced because they can't afford rent. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I mean, I think that you could probably house a whole village there with just seniors, seriously, that are homeless or at risk of homeless. Yeah.
I do think that it's not said enough that there is that gap of people that fall through the cracks where they make just enough to not be able to qualify for services, but they make too little to be able to afford rent, their medications, and just, cost of living.
That's absolutely right. There really is a growing gap, as we know there's this growing gap of people that are in that situation as rent goes up, because their income is not going up proportionally to what rent is increasing. So they really are, and they do not qualify for any subsidized housing, because it's a very low threshold relatively to qualify for even Section 8. I think that for the place, the Section 8 based housing for a 1-bedroom, I think the income level is $19,000 a year. That actually is pretty low.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so anybody over that gets nothing
Yeah.
at all.
It's really tough, and there's so many different populations we can think of, but when I think of it, Housing First Umpqua really started to exist really because we want to get those people that are chronically homeless off the street and permanently off the street and in housing, but we can't do that without a coordination of services and without more mental health services, social worker services, and less police trying to deal with the matters.
Yeah, and I would assume that most police probably agree with it, that they
Oh yeah.
didn't didn't
Hey,
come for
let's
this,
put
sign
some
up for
money
this job.
into Cahoots for Roseburg, you guys.
Well, I think that Compass, which is a mental health service provider under OHP here, is kind of trying to do that with their crisis intervention. It's not like Cahoots. That's much more
I
complex,
mean,
right?
Cahoots is not perfect, but it's something. It's like an extra layer of help, extra layer of defense. But we really need permanent, long-term social workers and caseworkers, really.
Oh, yeah. And it's a discussion that I've had with one of the medical mental health service providers doing homeless outreach, that if you're going to have a social worker or a mental health provider, that for one, it's not everybody is suited for that, even if they have a degree in social worker counseling. And that also needs to be somebody who's always the same person, somebody who really is going to be dedicated, somebody like Wayne. Yeah, because they develop a trust seriously with the people, and that's how you're going to get them to get into services that they're reluctant to get into, right? That's how you're going to help them, is having somebody that they develop a trust with, because they don't have a whole lot of reason to trust people that are service providers in this community, or probably a lot of communities, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Well,
could you go back to the local, could you go back to the list that is the local solutions that we want to propose to the city council?
yeah, now would be a good time to do a wrap because we're almost done.
Okay, if you
Okay,
could,
so one is the housing, and we had specific housing proposals that had to do with what came out of this study the city contracted. So this is basically housing and what they can do, and that would include any regulatory changes that needs tiny house villages. I'm a fan of looking at any kind of development fees that are prohibitions, particularly with the tie-in that these are permanent housing, right? That's affordable. The problem is sometimes these incentives, when they go to particularly private for-profit owners, tend to be short-lived. And 15 years may sound like a long time, but when you're talking about a community's need for permanent affordable housing, 15 years goes by fast. So the other list that we had was the safe ground, decriminalizing homelessness, address the public health, safety, sanitation, and establish a homeless commission or committee, and I think they actually call them commissions in the city of Roseburg. So let me see. I think I have a couple other slides because I just love slides. That comes from my teaching days. You have to have a PowerPoint or those students don't pay attention. College students particularly. So what you can do. So if you're out there and you want to do something about it, this actually comes from our Housing First Umpqua website, which is at the bottom of each one of the slides. Get the word out to others. Just talk about it. Dispel some of the things that you hear people say that aren't really factual. Address the issue of how we can, the community can actually address, housing and homeless in a more practical and actually humane way. Some of this to me just comes down to basic kind of humanity. Sharing on social media, since you probably got here from social media. It's probably and if you're watching on Facebook, you definitely did. So you can share. And Molly's our social media coordinator. She can tell you everything that you need to know, and we're afraid to ask about how to be a good social media guru. Writing letters to legislators, to city council, making phone calls to people as well as public officials, providing public testimony. I do believe that they're taking public testimony at the meeting on the 31st, and they're doing it through Zoom. I think there's some slots for people in person. And actually, Ashley would probably know more about that than I, since she's on the city council. And speak to public officials, you demonstrate, and then you vote. And I'm going to tell you, I don't do a lot of demonstrating these days, but what really has probably most impact is speaking to public officials and more importantly, voting. I mean, as importantly, voting, because if you have public officials that really are not doing what you believe should be done in public policy, that is one of the things that we do have to express that. But for right now, and on this, we have a list of, here's a city council people and the mayor, Larry Rich, and we have 8 city councilors, and we have 4 wards in the city, and our city councils represent us by ward. And so here's their phone number and contact information. If you, you can also get it on their website. And so why advocate? I love Dr. Seuss, one of my favorite books. I learned to read as a child by Dr. Seuss, not the Lorax. I'm a little bit older than that, but you know, I think it's right. You know, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. And I think that's really kind of why we do what we do, is because we do care. And anybody have any other questions, comments, statements?
I just want to say thank you, Betsy, for your tireless efforts and for talking for so long.
That I can do. Wayne, you have to unmute yourself, I think, Wayne. Yeah.
I got you. So just when we were talking about advocacy and getting resources out there, remember that we're going to be on the 31st. We're going to be at the Roseburg Dream Center for the Connecting Point Initiative, and you guys are going to be there also.
Right.
The other people that are supposed to be there that said they were going to be there are going to be HIV Alliance, Compass Case Management, and Adapt Peer Support, DPHN. And I guess Andrea Zielinski is going to be there. And I think the mayor said that he was going to be there too, but I'm not 100% sure, just to see the need. And I'm hoping that with Ashley seeing this, she could be there too. It's just we're looking to get resources out to the people and bring that information and get it out there. So hopefully it'll be a well-attended event. The Dream Center is reopening, so kind of excited about that. And hopefully other people will come.
Well, and then the connecting point will be there every Monday. Is that what's going to then happen once the reopening? It's going to go to the Monday from.
Yeah, it's going to be every Monday, and it's really like to have that engagement. Since we don't have an actual engagement center, we used to call it something else, you and I, back in the day, but something kind of like an engagement. This is the best thing that we can come up with right now to be able to get resources out there.
I'd like to invite everybody to tell your friends and your family to go to our website. We have a lot of data there that's going to be extremely useful for folks to understand. We don't have the same perspective on quick fixes and temporary places that you're going to time out of. It's really what works to end homelessness, to work on ending homelessness for all of us to do. And please share the website, encourage folks to go and learn what they need to do to help our city officials do the right thing. For once. I didn't say that, did I?
All right. Anybody else?
Thanks so much, everyone. We will be hosting another town hall, probably again at 6:30. So stay tuned for updates and message us if you guys have any other ideas or questions or comments. Thank you.